Are you worried about a high creatinine level on your latest blood test, even though you feel perfectly fine? It's a common scare, but I've got some good news for you. Not every rise in creatinine means your kidneys are in trouble. You see, creatinine is widely used as a marker of kidney health. But the thing is, its level in the blood can actually go up for reasons that have nothing to do with actual kidney damage. Many people experience elevated creatinine without any symptoms, making it really crucial to recognize common mistakes that can trigger these increases. Understanding these potential pitfalls can help prevent unnecessary worry and make sure that your test results are interpreted correctly. Number 1, excessive physical activity. So, let's dive into our first point. One common reason you might see an unexpected rise in your creatinine levels is if you've been engaging in excessive physical activity, especially strenuous exercise. You see, creatinine is a natural waste product that forms when creatine, a compound found right in your muscles, breaks down. Now, when you exercise intensely, your muscles are working harder, and this leads to a faster breakdown of creatine. And what happens then? Well, an increase in creatinine production. This is something you might particularly notice after activities like heavy weightlifting, going for a long-distance run, or doing some high-intensity interval training, often called HIIT. It's also interesting that the more muscle mass you have, the more creatine your body stores. And because of that, you might produce more creatinine, even when you're just resting. Now, it's really important to get this. This type of rise in creatinine doesn't usually mean there's something wrong with your kidneys. Your kidneys are likely still doing their job just fine, filtering waste from your blood. It's simply that there's temporarily more creatinine for them to deal with because your muscle metabolism has ramped up. Our kidneys are pretty efficient, and they will clear out this excess creatinine. However, if you have a blood test taken shortly after some intense exercise, it might show a higher level simply because the production of creatinine has temporarily outpaced how quickly your kidneys can clear it. This is just a normal physiological response from your body, not a sign of a disease. Think about athletes, bodybuilders, or even folks who've just recently decided to really ramp up their fitness routines. These are all prime examples of people who might see a temporary spike in their creatinine levels. And research backs this up, consistently showing that creatinine can go up quite a bit after vigorous workouts. For instance, studies have seen that endurance athletes can experience a noticeable rise in creatinine that can hang around for a day or two after they've exercised. In a similar way, resistance training can lead to muscle breakdown and repair processes, and these also contribute to higher creatinine. Again, this is a normal adaptation. It just reflects how your body responds to physical exertion, rather than being an issue with your kidney health. So, the big question is, how can you tell the difference between a harmless, exercise-induced increase and a rise that might actually be a concern for your kidney health? Well, firstly, you've got to consider the context. If you're an active person and that higher reading lines up with a period of intense training, then exercise is a very likely contributor. Your doctor might suggest retesting your creatinine levels after you've had a period of rest, perhaps asking you to hold off on strenuous exercise for about 48 to 72 hours before your next blood test. If those levels come back down to normal, or at least to a lower baseline, it's a strong sign that the elevation was indeed related to your exercise. But, and this is important, if your creatinine stays consistently high even when you've cut back on physical activity, or if you notice other signs that could point to kidney issues, things like changes in urination, any swelling, or fatigue that's not just from exercise, then it's definitely time for further investigation by your healthcare provider. Remember, communicating your exercise habits clearly to your doctor is absolutely crucial for them to accurately interpret your lab results. Number 2, dehydration. All right, moving on to number 2, dehydration. This is another frequent and often overlooked reason why your creatinine levels might be up. And it doesn't even take severe dehydration to see an impact on your blood tests. Even being mildly dehydrated can concentrate your blood. When this happens, the levels of various substances in your blood, including creatinine, can appear higher than they actually are. You see, when your body doesn't have enough fluids, the volume of your blood plasma decreases. And as a result of that, the waste products circulating in your blood, like creatinine, become more concentrated. This, in turn, leads to a higher reading when you get a lab test. Now, this doesn't mean your kidneys are failing. Instead, it just reflects a temporary state where you have reduced fluid in your system. Fluid loss can happen for all sorts of reasons, and it can significantly affect your lab values. Think about hot weather, sweating a lot during exercise, not drinking enough fluids throughout the day, or even illnesses that come with fever, vomiting, or diarrhea. All of these can lead to dehydration. When your body loses more fluids than it takes in, your kidneys naturally try to conserve water. One way they do this is by producing less urine. This water-saving process can also lead to a temporary increase in the concentration of creatinine in your bloodstream, simply because there's less fluid available to dilute it and carry it out of your body effectively. And an important note for seniors, sometimes the sense of thirst can diminish with age, making it easier to become dehydrated without even realizing it. This really underscores how important mindful hydration is for everyone, but especially as we get older. But here's the good news. Creatinine increases that are related to dehydration are usually temporary. They typically resolve once you get your hydration back to a proper level. So, if your doctor suspects that dehydration is the cause of a high creatinine reading, they'll likely recommend that you increase your fluid intake. And often, when you retest after you've rehydrated, you'll see those creatinine levels return to your normal baseline. This simple step can save a lot of unnecessary anxiety and prevent the need for further, more invasive testing. Remember, drinking enough water is really a cornerstone of overall health, and it plays a direct role in making sure your kidney function tests accurately reflect your actual kidney health. So, always aim to drink fluids regularly throughout the day, especially if you're in a warm climate or when you're being physically active. Number 3, high protein intake. Next up, at number 3, we have high protein intake. Yes, your dietary habits, especially if you eat a lot of protein, can also influence your creatinine levels. Sometimes this can lead to an increase that might be misinterpreted. As we've touched on, creatinine is a byproduct of creatine metabolism. And creatine itself is found in protein-rich foods, especially in cooked meat. So, when you consume large amounts of meat, your body gets to work processing that protein and the creatine it contains. This whole digestion and metabolism process naturally leads to a higher generation of creatinine. Simply put, the more cooked meat you eat, the more creatinine can be produced and then show up in your bloodstream. It's interesting how many common dietary patterns can inadvertently contribute to higher creatinine readings. For instance, if you're following a very high protein diet, maybe one that's popular for weight loss or for building muscle, you might notice an uptick in your creatinine. The same goes for those who regularly consume protein supplements like whey or casein powders. These can add a significant protein load, which then contributes to creatinine production. And it's not just about the quantity of protein, but also the source. Cooked meats, in particular, contribute directly to creatinine levels. This is because the cooking process itself can actually convert some of the creatine in meat into creatinine, which your body then absorbs. Now, It's really crucial to be able to distinguish between a rise in creatinine that's caused by your diet and an elevation that might indicate kidney disease. A dietary increase is usually pretty modest, and it's generally not associated with any symptoms of kidney damage. In this case, your kidneys are still working effectively to filter this creatinine. It's just that there's more of it being produced because of your food choices. So, if your creatinine is slightly elevated and you happen to consume a diet that's rich in meat or protein supplements, your doctor will likely want to discuss your eating habits. If your creatinine level then normalizes or decreases with these dietary adjustments, it strongly suggests that your diet was indeed a contributing factor. However, as always, if you have persistently high levels, especially if they're accompanied by other concerning symptoms, that will require further investigation to rule out any underlying kidney problems. Number 4, certain medications. All right, for number 4, we're talking about certain medications. It might come as a bit of a surprise, but several common medications can actually cause your creatinine levels to rise, and here's the kicker, without actually causing any harm to your kidneys. This is a really important point because an increase like this can be quite misleading, and it could prompt unnecessary concern about your kidney health. Some drugs that are known to potentially bump up creatinine include certain antibiotics like trimethoprim, which is often used for urinary tract infections, cimetidine, which is an antacid, and some cholesterol-lowering medications like fibrates. Even commonly used non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, or NSAIDs, like ibuprofen or naproxen, can sometimes affect creatinine readings. This is especially true if they're taken in high doses or for long periods. It's worth noting, though, that these can also, in some cases, affect kidney function itself, so careful monitoring is definitely needed with them. So, how do these medications alter creatinine levels? Well, it can happen in a couple of ways. Some drugs, like the trimethoprim and cimetidine we just mentioned, can interfere with the kidney's ability to secrete creatinine into the urine. Essentially, they compete with creatinine for the same transport pathways in the kidney tubules. Now, this doesn't mean the kidneys are damaged or that their filtering capacity, what doctors call the glomerular filtration rate, is reduced. It simply means that less creatinine is being actively pushed out into the urine, and that causes it to build up slightly in the blood. Other medications might actually interfere with the laboratory test itself that's used to measure creatinine, and this could lead to a falsely elevated result. The key thing to take away here is that an elevated creatinine level in these situations is often a harmless and reversible effect of the medication, not an indicator of kidney damage. Once the medication is stopped, or the dosage is adjusted, and this should always be done under medical supervision, of course, creatinine levels typically return to their previous baseline. This really underscores how important it is to give your doctor a complete list of all the medications you're taking. And that includes over-the-counter drugs and any supplements before you have any kidney function tests. To avoid any misinterpretation, it's so important for both patients and doctors to be aware of these potential drug interactions. If you are taking a medication that's known to affect creatinine, your doctor can then take this into account when they're looking at your results. They might decide to temporarily pause that medication, if it's medically appropriate, of course, before a retest. Or they might choose to use alternative markers of kidney function if there's any uncertainty. That open communication about your medications is just vital for getting an accurate assessment of your kidney health. Number 5, use of creatine supplements. Coming in at number 5 is the use of creatine supplements. These are really popular, especially among athletes and fitness enthusiasts who are looking to enhance their muscle mass, strength, and exercise performance. However, it's important to know that using these supplements will almost always lead to an increase in your blood creatinine levels. You see, when creatine is taken as a supplement, it's converted in the body to something called phosphocreatine, which is then stored in your muscles. A portion of this creatine and phosphocreatine naturally and continuously breaks down into creatinine, which, as we know, is a waste product. So, when you supplement with creatine, you're essentially increasing your body's pool of creatine. And this directly leads to an increased production of creatinine. The biochemistry here is pretty straightforward. More creatine in your system means more raw material available for creatinine to be formed. Again, this isn't a sign of kidney damage. It's simply a predictable metabolic consequence of taking creatine supplements. Your kidneys are likely functioning perfectly well and are busy filtering out this extra creatinine. However, because the rate of creatinine production is higher due to the supplement, the level in your blood will also be higher when it's measured. This can easily cause your creatinine to go above the typical reference ranges, and that might flag it as abnormal on a lab report, even if your kidney filtration rate is perfectly normal. So, if you use creatine supplements, it is absolutely crucial to inform your healthcare provider before you undergo any kidney function tests. Knowing about your supplement use allows your doctor to interpret your creatinine levels in the correct context. They might suggest that you stop taking the creatine supplement for a period, perhaps a few weeks, before retesting your creatinine. This way, they can get a baseline reading that isn't influenced by the supplementation. Alternatively, your doctor might choose to rely on other tests to assess your kidney function. For example, there's a test called cystatin C, which isn't affected by muscle mass or creatine supplementation. Or they might calculate your estimated glomerular filtration rate, or eGFR, while taking your supplement use into consideration. This kind of proactive communication can really save you from unnecessary alarm and potentially avoid further medical evaluations. Number 6, transient illness or stress. And finally, at number 6, we have transient illness or stress. You know, life's ups and downs, including those times when you're dealing with an acute illness or significant stress, can sometimes cause a temporary and usually harmless rise in your creatinine levels. Think about when your body is fighting off an infection. Maybe it's the flu, a common cold that comes with a fever, or even a minor localized infection. During these times, your body can enter what's called a catabolic state. What this means is that your body might start to break down muscle tissue at a slightly faster rate. It does this to provide energy and resources to help combat the illness. And since we know creatinine is a byproduct of muscle metabolism, this increased muscle breakdown can lead to a temporary increase in creatinine production and consequently higher levels in your blood. The mechanisms behind this can also involve dehydration, which, as we discussed, often accompanies illnesses like fever or gastroenteritis. Physical stress, too, like when you're recovering from surgery or an injury, can similarly put your body into a catabolic state, leading to increased muscle breakdown. Interestingly, even significant emotional stress has been anecdotally linked to physiological changes that might influence lab values, though its direct impact on creatinine is a bit less clearly defined than physical stressors or illness. The really important point here is that these elevations in creatinine are typically temporary. They tend to resolve as your body recovers from the illness, or as the stressful event passes. The outcomes are generally harmless, with creatinine levels usually returning to normal without any specific intervention needed, other than recovering from whatever the primary condition was. Once again, context is incredibly important when it comes to interpreting lab results, especially for creatinine. If you've recently been unwell, if you've experienced a high fever, or if you've been under unusual physical or emotional strain, it's absolutely vital to share this information with your doctor. A slightly elevated creatinine level when you're acutely ill is often viewed very differently than a similar elevation in someone who is otherwise feeling perfectly well. Your doctor will take all these factors into consideration, and they may recommend retesting your creatinine levels once you've fully recovered to make sure they return to your baseline. This careful approach helps to avoid misdiagnosis and unnecessary concern over what is often just a temporary physiological response from your body. HAL. Now, beyond the specific situations we've already talked about, it's worth noting that other individual factors can also contribute to what are considered normal variations in creatinine levels. Age, for instance, can play a role. As people get older, their muscle mass tends to decrease, and this might lead to lower baseline creatinine levels for them. On the other hand, individuals who naturally have greater muscle mass, regardless of their exercise habits, will generally have higher creatinine levels than those with less muscle. This is simply because they have more muscle tissue that's producing creatinine. And as we touched on earlier with high protein intake, your diet can also cause fluctuations. Because of all this, regular monitoring and taking an individualized approach to interpreting creatinine results are really important. What's considered normal for one person might be quite different for another, based on their unique physiology, their lifestyle, and their overall health profile. So, instead of just focusing on a single reading, doctors often prefer to look at the trends in your creatinine levels over time. For example, a stable but slightly higher than average creatinine level in a muscular individual might be perfectly normal for them. However, a sudden jump in creatinine in someone who previously had lower levels would definitely warrant more attention. So, to wrap things up, although an elevated creatinine level is a common indicator of kidney issues, it's really reassuring to know that a rise in these levels, especially if you don't have any accompanying symptoms, can often stem from some pretty harmless mistakes or various lifestyle factors rather than actual kidney damage. Being aware of these potential triggers is so key, both for patients and for healthcare providers. Understanding these influences allows for a much more accurate interpretation of lab results. This, in turn, helps to avoid unnecessary anxiety and ensures that any further investigations are only done when they're truly warranted. If you found this information helpful and it shed some light on creatinine levels for you, please feel free to share it. We'd love to hear from you. Have you experienced any unexpected changes in your creatinine? Go ahead and leave a comment below with your experience or any questions you might have. And don't forget to subscribe for more evidence-based health insights and practical tips on managing your well-being.